Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a really provocative and honestly pretty challenging essay by the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges. It's called The World According to Gaza, and it paints a seriously grim picture of our global reality. We're going to walk through its core arguments step by step.
Okay, so the essay kicks off with this really stark proclamation. Right away, it frames what's happening in Gaza not as some isolated conflict, but as a terrifying blueprint for the future. You know, like a first glimpse of a whole new world order that's emerging.
All right, so for this first part, we're going to dig into that core idea from the essay, that what we're all witnessing is actually the beginning of a new global era, and we really need to pay attention to what it's showing us.
So what Hedges is arguing here is that all those systems of international law, the ones we kind of took for granted, he says they're being totally dismantled. In this new reality he describes, there are no rules for the strong, only for the weak. Power, he claims, is the only thing that matters anymore.
And he doesn't just describe this new order, he actually gives it a pretty chilling name. Yeah, he calls it technologically advanced barbarism. And the whole idea here is that we have all these modern tools, killer drones, mass surveillance, super sophisticated weapons, but they're being used with this almost pre-modern brutality, with absolutely no regard for legal or moral limits. Okay, this slide really lays out the contrast Hedges is trying to make. On one side, you've got the principles we were all taught to believe in. And on the other, you've got this brutal reality he claims is winning out, where something like genocide isn't even unthinkable anymore. It's just another tool in the toolbox of control. And, to really hammer home how bleak this vision is, Hedges doesn't even just stick to his own words. He pulls out that famous, terrifying line from George Orwell's 1984. And the message is crystal clear. He's saying, this isn't some temporary crisis. This is the new normal, and it's horrifying. So, okay, if this is the new reality, this age of barbarism, then the essay naturally asks, who's behind it all? And that brings us to his deep dive into what he calls the global ruling class. He brings up this concept called Richestan. The idea is that it's this isolated, super luxe world where the global elite live. He argues that they're just completely walled off from the real-world consequences of their own decisions. And Hedges uses some really strong language to paint this picture. He says this class is just stuck in these self-referential bubbles, obsessed with their own pleasure and profit. In his view, they're not just ignoring the state, they're actively gutting it for personal gain. And they basically see anyone outside their little world not as a person, but as a thing, a commodity, to be used up and thrown away. But he doesn't stop there. He takes his analysis a huge step further, basically suggesting that their behavior isn't just about greed. It actually lines up with the clinical diagnosis for psychopathy. And here, he lists out these specific traits to make his case, that the people in power are just fundamentally incapable of governing with any kind of morality. I mean, in his view, things like empathy and honesty aren't seen as strengths at all. They're weaknesses that you look down on. Okay. So when you're faced with an analysis this grim, the natural question is, where's the hope, right? But the author has a very specific and honestly a pretty counterintuitive take on what hope even means in a situation like this. And the essay just comes right out and confronts anyone who's reading this and looking for that silver lining, that reason to think, oh, it'll all be okay. Right, so this is the crucial point. He just throws conventional hope right out the window. He calls it a dangerous fantasy. The way he sees it, telling yourself, oh, things aren't that bad, just makes you a part of the problem, an unwitting cog, as he puts it, because it stops you from seeing what's really happening. And then he does something really interesting. He completely flips the script on what despair means. He argues that real despair isn't the pain you feel when you see how bad things are. No, he says true despair is when you just give up. When you surrender your own power, either by hiding in those hopeful fantasies or just giving into apathy. So this whole redefinition of hope and despair, it all leads directly into the essay's really powerful conclusion, where Hedges lays out what he thinks is the only real path forward for people who refuse to just surrender. He just flips the entire script. See, instead of telling you to look for hope before you act, he argues that the act of resistance is the hope. That's where you find your empowerment. Even if it looks like you're going to fail, he says that act of resisting is the only thing that gives you dignity and self-worth. It's the only thing, in his words, that lets us even use the word hope. And this really is his final stark takeaway. any belief that the system can fix itself from the inside, that our political or judicial systems can save the day, in his view, that is a complete and total illusion. And so the essay doesn't wrap things up with a nice, neat answer. It ends with this incredibly powerful and provocative choice for all of us. He's saying, in the face of the world he's just described, there are really only two paths left. And he just leaves it right there for us to think about, to figure out where we stand.